Hey everyone, it's Kai.
And Lafayette, and this is
The Theory of Living. Thanks for tuning in. We're able to bring you this episode thanks to our Patreon members.
Patreon is a subscription-based platform where people can provide support for content creators like us.
Thanks to our Patreon members and supporters, we're able to provide free content on the podcast and weekly episodes.
By being a Patreon member, you'll have access to our entire podcast library, full video and audio episodes, along with much more.
If you like this episode and you feel it adds value to your life,
or you hate it,
please subscribe on Patreon and or leave your review on Apple Podcast.
And don't forget to mention it to your friends over your next beer. Truly, thank you again, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Hello.
Hello there.
Yeah, hello.
Hello there. And that'll be this week's episode of The Theory of Living.
Yeah. Again, we're back in the car. 10th episode.
No, 11th episode. Right?
Is this 11th?
I think so.
Okay, my bad. It could be 11th.
I think so.
But
I think we're on episode number 11.
Mm-hmm.
The last one would have been 10.
All good.
What are we going to be talking about today?
Well, we're going to talk about epistemology today. We briefly touched on it. My experience when I was young, right? I was like 7 years old. I went to a really small bookstore. I found this book about epistemology. And
do you remember what the book title was by chance?
Epistemology.
Oh, it's just epistemology.
Yeah.
Was it a Korean author? Or
No, was not.
Was it just translated into Korean?
Yeah.
Oh, it was in English?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But, really funny because every episode's title has been a theory of something, right?
Yeah.
So today, it is a theory of epistemology. But epistemology, by definition, is the theory of knowledge. So we can call this episode a theory of knowledge. If you want to.
I like it. A theory of knowledge. Epistemology, to break it down simply, is how we know something and what we know.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right. In a simple form, yeah. That's
the most simplistic, broken down version of it. And it's a branch of philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can say that epistemology. So some of you may not know what epistemology is, but like just Lafayette said, in the simplest definition, it is a branch of philosophy that concerns with limits and validity of knowledge. So why is that important? I mean, why? Right?
Well, I'll tell you it's important because we wouldn't have the scientific method without it.
Right.
We wouldn't have categorizations of many things in life. So you wouldn't have history, literature, English, science. Basically, every discipline is a form of epistemology.
Right.
To a degree.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's under the influence and the category of epistemology because everything that we do, every fields of education falls under that category, right?
Yeah.
After all, we're learning. So if you translate that word in Korean, we call it 인식론. It is not the theory of knowledge. It is a theory of perception and understanding. There are two different things. So that's how we. But if you look at the word epistemology, episteme is knowledge, but episte, I could be wrong on this, but
it's Latin, right?
Yeah, Greek, Latin, I'm not sure, but episte is perceiving.
Perceiving.
Yeah. So they're the same word basically, like perceiving and understanding. Even though in epistemology there are two different things, right?
Yes, category.
Right. But I think epistemology has been blamed for this stereotypes of philosophy that being boring, deep, difficult, all that. I think epistemology is the source of it, honestly, because when you look at the questions that epistemology asks, like what we know, it seems almost intuitive to, most people, right? Well, yeah, of course I know things because I learn it. I learn it because I read it, I perceive it. I mean, these things seem so obvious.
Yeah, we make these distinctions all the time. But these distinctions have also hindered us in a lot of ways. I mean, the biggest example we can think of is, Darwinian's theory of evolution. Right? For the longest time, the way we explained basically, the human race, species, and all these other things, the most classical response to that was there's a creator or a god. And for a lot of people, that was the natural conclusion. Why would you even think to ask more? If you look around, it's so obvious. There was obviously somebody that created this. Somebody that created the trees. Somebody created an environment in which we could breathe, have food, sustenance, and survive. Like, it'd be so obvious to anybody that, yes, our senses are telling us this had to be created. Because we've seen everything in our lives be created. Whether that's a brother, a father, a mother, whatever. We see the cycle of creation, creator, createe, and we just would assume and apply that to everything in life. But here comes Darwin with this other theory that kind of counters this. Oh, maybe things occurred in such a way that they appear to have been created, like there was actual intent, but it's just a byproduct of these natural processes. And boom, you've changed the world. So for somebody out there that might think, oh, epistemology is kind of, it's silly. There's a lot of things that we assume to be true or take as literal fact via our senses and our perception that could be misserving us and are actually not the true nature of things or the best explanation of things. So there's alone your value in epistemology.
Yeah, I think, the epistemology it's been only 4 or 5 centuries, by the way. It's relatively young branch of philosophy. Even though Plato talks about, knowledge and things like that prior to, we're going to talk about John Locke soon, but prior to John Locke, yes, there had been some discussions on knowledge and, the epistemological ideas, but it wasn't until John Locke really started the epistemology that we know today. And it was the reactionary force against metaphysics because, philosophers, that framework of metaphysics within which it was almost impossible to break out of it because metaphysics itself could be contradictory. And at the very least, it's almost impossible to prove metaphysical ideas. The only, for example, a disproof of existence of God, which is a metaphysical idea, can only be refuted by another metaphysical idea.
Which then gets us into ontology, which is the exploration of reality and what contains that.
Right. So in the end, you're just circling around. There's no really meaningful, breakthrough out of metaphysics. So the epistemology was a reaction to this, impossibility and ambiguity of metaphysics that, wait a second, if we just keep going this way, there's no objectivity. It's full of ambiguities. How are we going to actually advance our discourse within this framework? And that's when, John Locke really came up with this idea that, wait a second, there's no such thing as innate ideas. It's all through experiences, right? Which he uses the term tabula rasa, right? The blank state. We're born as a blank state, and everything's written on the blank state becomes our knowledge.
Yeah.
Right.
And then you have the great skeptics as well that kind of combat these things. Hume being the prime example, who, was vehemently against anything that we could not prove via scientific means, or things that we couldn't necessarily relate scientifically or convey in any meaningful way. So Locke being a rationalist, right? Or an empiricist.
Empiricist, yes.
Yeah, sorry, not a rationalist. Was a huge turning point, like you're saying, philosophically speaking.
Yeah.
Of coming to the table and then saying, we're byproducts of essentially environment, experience, and all these sensory things. And then Hume, who came after Locke, was also saying that, you can know two things or you can know things in two different ways. Things via relation, or by definition, and then matters of fact. So something, we know via relation would be our ideas related to a concept. So something like a triangle, this example is used all the time. Try to imagine a triangle with 5 points. You can't, because by definition, it would no longer be a triangle. Right. So that's a truth via relation to the idea of itself. Whereas something like, hey, there's a tornado outside. You can't know that unless you go outside and then use the sensory experience to verify.
In Kant's view, by the way, the example of triangle that you said would be analytical proposition, right? Because the concept of the predicate is contained in the predicate, the concept of the subject.
A priori, right?
Yeah. So, priori, but the distinction between that he makes between synthetic and analytical, analytical being, again, the predicate of the concept of the predicate is contained in the concept of the subject.
Yes.
So when you say triangle and 5 points, right? I mean, you can already tell without the object or the adjective of the subject itself. You already know there's no 5 points. You already know that there are 3 points.
Yes.
Right. So right. Which is
it's something that's knowable, independent of the experience.
Yeah. Right. But again, okay. We're talking about this from their perspective, through their words, the discussions at that time. But if you think about it, actually, we've talked about this earlier. That example, and also the classic example of all bachelors are unmarried. Yes, that's, by the way, the example of analytical proposition, but it's not exactly priori, right? Because first you have to know the language.
Yep.
Right.
Which is a sensory experience.
Yeah.
You're not born knowing language.
Right. It's post-experience. Learning languages not prior to experience. So in that sense, this is not exactly, a priori.
Yes.
In today's standards. I mean, this is sort of like, I don't want to say, flaw. But idea still holds true, in my opinion. It's just that maybe his example was not exactly robust, but his idea, I think, it still holds true to a certain degree, not entirely, but I think today, I don't think there's any other alternative that is, that gives us a better framework than that of Kant. Yet.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, he's been...
we're just jumping around too much, but,
Well, I mean, you can challenge the framework, and that's typically what these philosophers do to become the next big guy or the guy that kind of marks his point in history. He says, oh, look at all these assumptions you're making of the previous guy. So, yeah, it's something you can definitely say in Kant's case is there's a systemic issue, right? Because you're assuming that language is a non-sensory experience, but we do know that's true. So it'll be interesting. We'll have to look at some of the criticism of Kant's.
Oh yeah, there are plenty. There are plenty.
He's been dead for a while.
Yeah,
a few hundred years almost. So 1700s, right? So or did he die in the early 1800s? Did he actually make it to the 19th century?
I don't think so. No.
Yeah. Okay.
No. But even Locke's understanding of epistemology is in today's knowledge wrong, right? Because he completely ignore the innate ideas, which is not true that we know today. There are plenty of evidence that we are born with, even animals too, born with a certain knowledge, the prior to experience, through DNA or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So, we know for sure that Locke's idea is not completely true, but it is important because he led the shift of central idea in epistemology, right? He challenged collective ideas existed thousands of years prior to him. So that's why it is so important to talk about him, right? But even in his theory, on top of that, him being wrong about innate ideas, also his attempt to steer away from metaphysics, in my opinion, didn't really succeed either, because you know things through experience, but the idea, as soon as you acquire as knowledge, it becomes a concept internally, completely independent of the physical world and your experience. Then it becomes automatically metaphysical in nature.
And that's another problem with this idea, is that the experience can change when you have it again. When you run into this, the sensory, you can't reproduce something 100 times exactly the same. There's no two same things in reality.
Right.
There's things that are very similar, but by virtue of being different.
But is that right though? Is that right? Is that statement true when you said that there are no two things in reality?
By definition of being able to categorically separate them.
Yeah.
Say if you have two rocks, right? They could be identically composed of the same atoms,
right.
Layout and everything of that nature.
Yeah.
But the fact that you can even separate them,
yeah,
physically or intellectually,
yeah,
they're no longer the same. So is that a byproduct of the physical, the sensory experience, or is it something of the mind?
Right.
Are we separating it then in a metaphysical sense?
Right. So that's a fun discussion, right? Because when you say that, there's rock right there, or tree right in front of us, right? There's one tree that you and I agree that there's one
there's
tree.
a tree there.
But let's say, you stay the same, your mental condition stays the same, but I'm high as fuck, right? And I see a tree that is different from what you see. Then can we say that there are two trees and one tree in reality? Because reality, again, is something that only can be shaped in your mind. If you don't have any faculty in your mind, then there's no reality, right?
Yeah.
In that sense,
for the personal experience.
Okay, we're back again. Very frustrated right now because the camera is just acting up and we have no clue what's happening, even though we're engineers. Well, glad that we quit our jobs, by the way.
Obviously, people are going to start thinking, wait, did they quit or were they fired? What is it really?
Hey, I was not fired, by the way.
I was just highly suggested to leave. It's different, okay?
Right. So anyway, the I'm gonna try this again. But Kant was the first one who settled the debate, saying that, okay, guys, both exist. The innate capacity, right, and sensory experience both exist. Okay, and also not just they exist independently, but they also have to act together in order for us to acquire knowledge. It's not just that the knowledge or content of reality is passively received by the senses. It's not like that, okay? We gain that information through senses, but rather than information is actively shaped by the mind. Right? That was, whoa, that's crazy. Everybody was like, that is crazy. But, the reason Kant is so important in philosophy is that because of this breakthrough idea, there's still a lot of discussions that are that try to challenge the idea of Kant, right, still occurring in the framework of his ideas. It's not far from it, right? I mean, he's that much influential. I'm not saying that everything that he says is correct. It's going to be challenged, one day, meaningfully, but not yet. Not yet. A lot of discussions that we're having is still not far from, his framework.
Yeah. I mean, the things seem to shift drastically, but some things take centuries until we arrive at a better solution or offer a better alternative to the current known system. And that's the power of philosophy and, the natural sciences and all the other things that we arrive at a more seemingly accurate conclusion about what reality is and what constitutes it. And there's an invaluable... I lack the word, but there's a necessary stepping stone in all the things leading up to that.
Oh yeah, for sure, absolutely.
From Socrates all the way up to now, and this, that excludes and includes a lot of philosophers, people that weren't philosophers, have a huge impact on history in the way we can then engage with reality and try to find a better solution. And not necessarily that there's even a better solution. There's just alternate solutions for the time period and cultural period you live in, which is more of a kind of even a postmodern thing to say. We're based in a time period historically, culturally, geographically, which then impacts the ability for us to engage and understand the world we live in, which is also a part of the evolutionary process. Things are embedded upon us, physiologically, and then also emotionally by the place we live in.
Yeah, and then, another really big distinction that we need to make of Kant's view from his, predecessors, that, okay, he acknowledges innate capacity, and, you may think automatically that, oh, that's like metaphysical, but it's not, because, okay, he acknowledged the, inner capacity, and then it enables us to understand some truth, but of course within the faculty of our sensibility, which is like time and space, right? There's a limit to it, right? And that's why it is different from previous rationalist metaphysicists saying that pure reason has the power to understand and grasp the mysteries of universe. That's what metaphysicists used to argue, and Kant saying that, okay, I agree with you guys on innate capacity, but I mean there's a limit to it.
Yeah,
we don't have any capacity to understand the universal truths, and it's bound by time and space. So that's why it is so different from, the previous metaphysics. And in my opinion, that's why his view finally, escaped the essence of metaphysics that Locke couldn't do. Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was the debate between the continental rationalist, right? And then the empiricist. So there was that back and forth between them for a long time. And like you said, here comes Immanuel Kant just knocking it out of the park with, what are we doing here?
Right.
Come on, guys. Like, pull it together. And, I mean, again, going back to Charles Darwin, he came after Kant. So imagine the impact that Kant's philosophy had on great thinkers in the way we view the world, so that it was even possible for somebody to come up with an alternative solution to something in the natural sciences.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the power of these ideas in the philosophy, is that it could impact every other area of study, epistemologically speaking.
Yeah, absolutely.
It changes the way we interface with knowledge and how to understand what do we know and how do we know it. That's how powerful that philosophy was. Yeah, and it didn't even seem to be necessarily his aim. He probably had no idea the amount of impact it was going to have on the entire world and the way we interface, and try to arrive at knowledge, even in our present day situations.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two aspects of not just Kant, but mostly these German philosophers, right? I mean, their contribution to the progression of philosophy is gigantic, right? But also, their ideas are too concrete and takes up the big portion of our today's philosophy that I think still we have hard time to really break through it, right? I think so. There are two aspects of it. That's the way I see it. We owe a lot of things to them, but also their work and the framework is just too, in a way, too good or too rigid that is like modern philosophers are having a hard time to break through it.
Well, this is also, kind of the one effective strategy to get around specific types of philosophy is to not engage in the system they've created.
Right.
So a lot of the problem is that we do this in more than just philosophical debates and arguments. We do this in our everyday life. We play their game, and due to the structure of the game, we can never win or escape it.
Yeah.
By solely playing into it.
Yeah.
So there's probably...
It's a dangerous game, yeah.
And
it's a necessary game, though, right? I mean...
It is.
It's a lot more beneficial to engage with their ideas. We talked about this earlier, that whether or not you agree with their ideas, the reason it's important to, study your predecessors' ideas and views is that even if you don't agree with it, you can still engage with their ideas and then, interact with them.
Yes.
Which is way more beneficial than, not engaging with their ideas. Otherwise, your ideas going to be never challenged.
Yeah.
Which is a big problem.
Yeah, you have to be open to the criticism, which in this situation would be willing to accept other conclusive ideas. Yeah.
And then also another benefit is that by not studying your predecessors' views, you are risking to repeat their mistakes.
Yeah.
Right? That's a big one.
Yeah.
I mean, this applies to everything, actually, science or history or anything that has, has been around for forever, for a long time. If you don't study, previous ideas, then there's a possibility that you're going to make the
pitfalls.
Which is completely unnecessary, right?
Yes.
So, this is why we study philosophy. This is why we study history. Engage with old people's ideas, even though 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, who cares what they thought? But it's important, right? It's important because without the question of Plato's, for example, Socrates, you may not have Plato's, right? We talked about this. Without Locke, we may not have Kant, right?
Yeah.
Is all this collective idea progressively, created the idea that we have today. And that's why it's important to, study, previous ideas and views and, challenge the ideas in a way.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's funny, even what we're talking about right now, again, going back to Hume, he would be skeptic of even this statement. This is a kind of inductive statement. So we would say that things in the past have always occurred in a specific way. We've always learned from the past, grown, and then we've improved upon it. But that's not etched into the fabric of reality in any meaningful way we can prove. Like, we don't necessarily have to rely on previous generations' knowledge to advance. But things have always led that way. So it's within good reason to assume they would continue. Hume would call this custom. Custom is what leads to progress. It's like these reoccurring themes. Even though we can never actually prove causality or see it, we understand things tend to happen in repetitive ways, repeatable. But there's no reason that they always have to continue that way.
Right, of course not.
Right? I mean, even gravity and things like that are only byproducts of specific systems remain the way they are and the best explanations we have. But eventually the sun will burn up. All these things will occur. The way we understand physics and all that will be, potentially tossed to the wind.
Right.
So again, knowing that in the statement you made, I still think it's extremely valuable that we do engage with the past and these previous ideas, but also remain skeptic to, maybe they're not incredibly valuable. Have open-mindedness to both sides. Maybe they will have a value, maybe they won't. But you have to engage with it to actually decipher that or decide it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And, I think we need to talk a little more about Kant because it's really important. But, he's basically saying that it's the human mind that creates the reality, and therefore our experience and knowledge are limited to the world of experience constructed by and in the mind, right? So it is really interesting if you look at, think about this a little more further, that he, attributes the transcendental quality, but still at the same time draws a clear line of limitation that what we can do and what we can know, right? So that's why his view was so fresh and revolutionary. That he acknowledges that quality, right? But transcendental, when he says, like, it's not the metaphysical, idea. The transcendental quality as in, like, existing within us. Like, that's the craziest part, right? But again, he clearly admits that there's a limit to it.
Yeah.
Right? And in a way, you can say that that's why, he was probably atheist, right? From his view, even though, I don't know. To me, it's not super clear whether or not he was atheist, because he's acknowledging that, okay, there are universal truths that we don't have any capacity to find out the knowledge of it, right?
Yeah.
But in his view, you can say that, maybe then, he doesn't acknowledge the existence of God. But he acknowledges the existence of universal truths, right? So, I don't know if he has ever, spelled it out that, I don't believe in God.
I know he goes into the virtues and ethics. And he does a lot resembling, like, morality of man in regards to God.
Right.
So I don't think he was necessarily atheistic. But I also don't think he claimed maybe necessarily the Judean Christianity. There was some stuff he did change his spelling of his name to the more Hebrew one, I believe.
Okay.
So it's interesting, right? Because how can a guy have such a strong and new representation of reality, present it in such a, like, it's not flawless, but fucking near it at that time, near flawless, and then also still maintain a belief in potentially a God.
I know. It's
hard because even using the word God, we smuggle in all these cultural things and these time period things about your idea of what a God is in 2022 and what your idea is. So it's hard to even talk about it,
right?
Because you can read his work and you can decipher and take away certain things and different things without getting into the historical context, during Kant's time period, also the way he lived and all those things. It's really hard to say yes, indefinitely he believed in the Judean Christian God, or it gets complex real quick, because again, definitions, words, language are all in relation to a time period, which is just kind of crazy to think about.
Right.
It's almost like we're speaking a different language in some ways.
Yeah, it does.
You have to explain so much to even actually arrive to a meaningful conclusion. And that's the problem we run into, I think, in reality a lot right now, is that when we talk to somebody, we have such a different idea of the same word or the concept we're using. We're using cow, but the image I summon in my head is so different than your image.
Yeah.
Or, a more complex thing. We're very like God. Whew. It's crazy. From person to person, that definition is wildly different.
Oh yeah, 100%.
So, I mean, that's the value of experience, going out and kind of acquiring your own definition of these things.
Right.
In a way where you can communicate it with somebody through words. But again, I think, like we talk about all the time, that the experience is so much different than the words we use to communicate the experience, that you absolutely should go get the experience to have a more robust understanding of the symbols
Yeah.
and the words we use.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be very interesting, moving forward, because we have a lot more knowledge than, what they had to work with, right? So, I mean, the advancement in science and physics, and especially neuroscience, I think we'll have, at the very least, better understanding or explanation of how we acquire knowledge, and we'll have dramatic improvement in epistemology as well, I think.
Yeah. I think we'll have a more robust definition. This is the hard thing about knowledge. I feel like, that kind of common expression, the more things change, the less they do. Because even the knowledge we have accessible to us, it's impossible for us to parse it out, right? So that's why we're going to have algorithms, AI, computers solving a lot of these problems that are going to arrive to different solutions and conclusions. I don't know if these things necessarily make the world better. It makes it different, for sure. Things will change and become different. But again, better is such a relative term. I mean, I think the best we can say is different.
Yeah.
That's probably the most accurate definition I can say. But we do have things wildly available to us that they didn't. It'd be amazing to see what Immanuel Kant would come up with today if he had the information at his fingertips like we do.
Right.
That'd
be amazing.
Honestly, any of these geniuses, Socrates, probably any great philosopher, man, what ideas would they have right now?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Like, with what they had at the time, they still could come up with these ideas that we still study today, Yeah. And that's crazy, right?
Yeah.
And those geniuses, probably, we've talked about this many times, not just, these great thinkers, but also great, scientists and, writers. They probably, count maybe for 1%, maybe like 5% of the entire population. And, people like us just, at least have a capacity to appreciate it.
Yeah, at the very least we can appreciate it. You can recognize the genius.
Right. But I mean, I'm not saying you can, right? But I mean,
obviously if they're listening to us, they recognize genius. Come on, man.
Right. by no means we're a genius.
Fucking no way.
Yeah, we just have a love of, philosophy and, good literature. But, every time we look at it a little more closely, just reminds me that how much I appreciate their work, and still really that intellectual stimuli, right, serves as, and I appreciate it a lot, and it makes a huge difference in my life. Yeah.
I think when you engage with greatness, some of it rubs off on you. Not that it makes us greater. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying it reminds me that, yes, greatness exists, and it beckons me to become better than I was previously. And it allows me to shape my worldview and have it challenged. And I find that so exciting.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of people think philosophy is this boring, dull, antiquated subject matter that really doesn't have any value today. And I just think that's so far from the truth. I think philosophy is one of the most humbling things to go and learn. Because, again, these guys aren't saying, hey, this is the absolute solution. This is the best view and the best interpretation of reality. Believe it, or you're going to die and go to hell. It doesn't put that type of pressure on you, that unnecessary pressure. Right. It just presents its ideas and its worldview, and it kind of like kicks the ball to you. Like, okay, well, what are you going to do with that?
Yeah.
Are you going to challenge it? Are you going to accept it? Are you going to disregard, not engage with it at all?
Yeah.
And it's very humbling, because I think when you realize all these great, amazing philosophers typically disagreed with each other, yet they were still able to grow the study, which affected all the sciences, all the maths, and the world as we know it.
Yeah.
But they didn't have to kill each other to do it. And don't get me wrong, there are some philosophers that have some cult type stuff tied to them, but generally speaking, they were able to.
It's intellectual battles, basically, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then, I mean, they, whether or not they agree with each other, I mean, there's still their positive synergistic effects, you know, especially contemporaries, right?
Yeah.
Even, you know, Hume and Kant we talked about, you know, they have similar view but different views, right?
Oh, yeah, very. Yeah. I mean, Hume's skeptic through and through, right? I wouldn't say Kant was a skeptic. He was in some regards, but not to the degree that Hume was.
Yeah.
But again, these guys are like necessary. You know, these little intellectual battles and these butting of heads to get out something new and more.
Yeah.
And that's what you get when you engage with older material, or material you may not find material you may not find relevant to your life. It can be totally relevant to the world because you're the only person who has the thoughts and the ideas and the experience that you have. And once you engage with this, you can have a different result. Essentially, you're mixing two different spices together. Your spice is super unique to yourself. And you could have an amazing concoction at the end.
Yeah.
But it requires you to engage with it. And I think that alone is worth checking out, because you never know. You never know what you could get. You never know what you could get by reading a book, you know, digging a little deeper, asking more questions why, instead of just accepting, like, oh yeah, that's the way the world is.
Right. I mean, yeah, in a way that epistemology is exactly that movement, right? That, I mean, like I said earlier, it was that attempt to, you know, break out of metaphysics, but at the same time, it is that same spirit that you just said, that ask questions why. I mean, the things that you take for granted, why does it matter how you know what you know? Like, yeah, I mean, in everyday life, it doesn't matter, I guess. You don't have to know. I mean, you don't have to, right?
No.
But it is that same context. I mean, the same thing as, you know, ask questions of, you know, ask questions why of many things in your life. And in doing so, you have an opportunity to dig deeper and challenge your ideas, and you learn from that a lot.
Yeah.
You know?
You get a more rich, robust understanding of life and what it has to offer, and its complexities, its absurdities, its tragedies, its comedies. I mean, think about a rock, man. A rock, as far as we're aware, cannot ask itself why. Why am I a rock? Why am I in this setting? But so many people might as well be rocks because they don't ask these questions.
Yeah.
You gonna be a rock? Like, don't get me wrong, I fucking love rocks. I go climb them all the time. But man, what a passive way to live.
Yeah.
You're missing out on so much of your life. And again, you know, maybe that's just my ego talking because I live in that way and I'm trying to convince you. But I honestly believe if you did engage this way, you might find out, oh shit, I want to engage the world more like this. I find more joy in my life, a more complex depth understanding of emotions. I'm not just parroting what I think should be going on in my life. You know, so many people get their ideas about what life is and how they're supposed to react via these representations of reality. You know, the media, songs, all of these things that you're so far from actually experiencing reality because we've just been living out what we've seen on the screen or what we've read or what we've heard. We haven't really decided for ourselves how I should feel, how I should react. And again, this comes with a challenge because some of those things are not going to line up with the society and culture you live in. And yeah, you could very well be rejected, hate it, and, you know, chastised or punished in that culture or society by having your own views. But again, here's the thing. The only people that really change the world are the people with their own views. And sometimes those people are dictators. Sometimes they're horrible people.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're philosophers, though. You know? Sometimes they're wonderful people. Sometimes they're people like Mother Teresa or, you know, I don't want to say popes because... But these people that have these radical views that they're not okay accepting the reality the way it is, and they shape and create their own, and that impacts other people.
Yeah.
And you have the power to do that. You do. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah,
we have the power
true.
to change reality, and that blows my mind all the time.
Yeah. True.
That is so cool. So I guess on that note, fucking get out there and change reality. What are you doing?
Well, if you're living in the reality.
Oh shit, here we go. There's no tree, man. That's not a tree. It's a green screen.
Right. But again, I like to summarize concept view a little bit because I think it's relevant to how we can apply it to our lives, right? Because he will led the paradigm shift in the focus of philosophy from the metaphysical speculation to a critical examination of the human mind. And I think that can be applied to, you know, everyday life of human, like to us, you know, like just don't battle with, or, you know, don't live in the value of, I'm really being careful here, but the things, well, he used the term, the things in themselves, right? I mean, you can have faith in it. Don't get me wrong. I mean, faith is, again, in its nature, we cannot dispute it, right?
It's one of those things by definition, right?
Right. So I'm not going to go there. But what we can take from his view and idea is that the critical mind, like critical examination of the mind, that is something that we can apply to our everyday life, right?
And I would say in regards to faith, if you do apply that, you'll have a more robust and well-developed faith. If it can sustain and hold up to the scrutiny of critical thought.
Right.
Your faith will be stronger. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I just wanted to point that out, that this is not just, you know, irrelevant idea existed a few centuries ago.
Yeah.
I mean, this is still relevant.
Today, right now.
Yeah, today. So anyway, I think we can wrap it up at this point. Obviously, we could not talk every ideas and philosophers in epistemology. We just touched on briefly the most important figures. Yeah. Kant and Locke.
And again, this is from our experience, you know, the ones we chose to engage with and then talk about. But you can go read, you know, historians' accounts, philosophers' accounts, and they'll call forth other philosophers, other things that led to different conclusions, right?
Yeah.
So this is our interpretation. And again, it's going to change as our knowledge grows. And we'll talk more about Kant. I mean, we're going to talk about Kant for the rest of our lives. And other philosophers and their impacts. This is just a small section of the impact in regard to epistemology that we chose to deal with and interface with. Yeah. It's not the entire picture. You got to go out and look for yourself. Yeah, this is a very small sliver of the picture.
And our goal is to not just presenting, you know, obviously existing ideas. I mean, Kant's view and, you know, all the philosophers are already out there. I mean, probably many of you have read it. But our goal is to, through this discussion, we can attempt to what values and what methods and what, you know, ways of ideas that we can apply in our lives and, you know, intellectually engaging daily, I guess, right?
And plus, it also, for you, the reader, sorry, not reader, listener, watcher, viewer, whoever you are, you can understand some of these things, these people, these concepts, these ideas have emboldened us to go live the life we're living right now. To do a podcast, to talk to you, to lean into who we want to be and who we feel we are. Yeah. So you could go read these guys, get inspired, or, you know, maybe even we're going to help inspire you or get you on the path. Yeah. But I think one of the main objectives that we're trying to do with our podcast is not only discuss the ideas, but put them into practical practice.
Yeah.
You know, we're living these things. These are not just conceptual things.
Right.
They're things that actually can be applied to your life.
Right.
And have real value.
Right. And then when we say the discussion, we don't mean like passively received ideas that are applied to our lives. When we say discussion, we critically process those ideas and then becomes ours, and that's why we're confidently applying those ideas to our lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about this many times. It's not passive reception of ideas. It is active interpretation of ideas that we aim, probably for the rest of our lives, right?
Yeah.
So I want you to do the same thing. I think this is so valuable, right?
Yeah.
There's only one thing that can protect you from everything, that is being critical, right?
Yes. And that protection of... It's a protection that doesn't prevent you from being injured or being hurt or experiencing all that life has to offer. That protection is through an understanding of the diversity of life and what it's going to throw at you. And maybe having an appreciation for the things that we often deem as negative or painful. And be able to develop a different idea surrounding those things.
Yeah.
And I like you mentioned, we challenge these ideas all the time in our daily life. We're constantly looking for ways to challenge any philosopher's idea. Not to say that they're wrong or that they're right, but to be willing to engage with them earnestly and then try to develop a more robust philosophy, one that's practical and applicable to living. Because as much as Kant did in his life, and he did a great amount, he didn't leave, I think he was in like 10 miles of his home.
Right.
The guy didn't have any life experience that you have.
Right.
And he still came up with these amazing ideas.
Right.
So think of how much you can come up with, what type of doctrines or philosophy ideas that you can have that could be so potentially impactful on the entire world if you're just willing to try and engage with it.
Yeah.
Take some time to think.
Yeah.
Take some action. You could be the next Immanuel Kant. You really could.
Right. Yeah.
You really could. But you got to go out there and experience. You got to come up with a plan. You got to try to make things happen. You can't be passive. You have to be critical.
Yeah.
It's so necessary to be critical.
Yeah. Very good point. So, thanks for listening. Please let us know if there's anything that you'd like us to discuss in terms of, anything actually.
Yeah. We're open.
Yeah,
I like
we're
talking
open,
about things.
So,
all right, guys. Take care.
bye. That's this week's episode of the Theory of Living podcast. Thanks for listening with us. We are Lafayette and Kai. Don't forget to join us next week for another episode.
And if you'd like to help support us, we have a Patreon page where you can subscribe for exclusive content.
Also, please share it with others who you think may find value in our discussion.
Leave a rating, a review, and please subscribe to the podcast.
Thank you again.
See you next time.